Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a genuine masterpiece of English literature, Charles Dickens's Bleak House. But look, we aren't just doing a standard book report here. We're going to dig into its brilliant, award-winning 2005 TV adaptation, unearth the real-life Victorian detective who inspired an absolute legend of a character, and break down a fascinating academic analysis that reveals the story's terrifying institutional villain. So, let's just jump right in.
So, here's the big question. How do you take a dense, incredibly complex 1852 Victorian novel, one that was originally published over 20 monthly installments, mind you, and turn it into a blockbuster modern TV hit? Well, that was the exact puzzle facing the BBC back in 2005. They had to figure out how to make this massive 19th century epic addictive and, actually accessible to a 21st century audience.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the critics immediately recognized what a triumph this was. The Radio Times completely hit the nail on the head in 2005, saying it felt less like watching a TV drama and more like sampling a strange other world, a tremendous piece of television. And they were spot on. It was a total world-building masterclass. Plus, you had these mesmerizing performances anchoring the whole thing, especially Gillian Anderson playing the secretive, tormented Lady Dedlock, and Charles Dance just completely owning the role of the ruthless lawyer Tulkinghorn.
Okay, so how did they actually pull this off? Well, producer Nigel Stafford Clark made a few really brilliant structural choices. Instead of those traditional, sweeping, multi-hour historical episodes we're so used to, they went with a fast-paced, 30-minute format. Basically, they injected it with this crackling soap opera energy and scheduled it to run twice a week, right after the massively popular show EastEnders. Oh, and they shot it in high definition, which was a huge deal for British drama at the time and meant the makeup and set design had to be meticulously detailed. But here's the absolute genius of it. By slicing this epic into these bite-sized soap opera chunks, the BBC actually perfectly mirrored Dickens's original monthly serial cliffhangers. They completely updated the delivery for modern viewers, but kept that thrilling, original spirit totally alive.
And wow, did it work. The results absolutely speak for themselves. This sort of Trojan horse approach, sneaking classic literature onto our screens using a modern soap opera format, was a massive triumph. We're talking a prestigious Peabody Award in 2005. Then, at the 2006 BAFTAs, it grabbed Best Drama Serial, and Anna Maxwell Martin won Best Actress for playing Esther Summerson. It even crossed the pond and picked up Primetime Emmys for Outstanding Makeup and Cinematography. It basically proved, once and for all, that classic lit can totally captivate modern audiences if you just innovate the format.
Section 6. From Modern TV to Victorian Reality, Unmasking the Characters. With the show's success established, let's peel back the layers of the actual story, starting with the real-life history that inspired one of literature's most famous sleuths.
Let's look at this fact versus fiction comparison. On the right, we have Inspector Bucket, the fictional Scotland Yard detective from Bleak House, who tirelessly hunts for the truth and unravels the murder of Tulkinghorn. But on the left, that's his real-life inspiration, Charles Frederick Field. Field was an actual actor turned policeman who eventually rose to become chief of the detective branch and later retired as a private eye. Because of his theater background, the guy absolutely loved using disguises. He had this incredible flair for showmanship, which, naturally, caught the eye of a very famous author.
That author, of course, was Charles Dickens. You see, Dickens was totally fascinated by the London police's newly formed detective branch. So much so that he'd actually go on midnight rounds with Field to observe the city's gritty underbelly. The two formed a real friendship. Dickens even wrote journalistic pieces about Field for his journal, Household Words, calling him Inspector Weald, before officially immortalizing his friend's deductive skills and his portly presence as Inspector Bucket in Bleak House. It is, quite literally, the birth of the literary detective.
But here's the twist. While brilliant detectives and scheming lawyers fill the pages and the screen, they aren't the real enemy. So the crucial point is, the true villain of Bleak House isn't a person at all. No, it's an abstract, unfeeling, and entirely inescapable bureaucracy.
To really wrap our heads around this, we're turning to an amazing academic analysis by Molly Connor. In her paper, called The Most Dangerous Predator, the Court of Chancery, she introduces this absolutely terrifying concept. She argues that the central legal court in the novel, the Court of Chancery, actually operates as a biological predator.
Let's break down exactly what institutional predation means. It's the consumption of alive prey's resources by a bureaucratic system to sustain its own functioning. The Court of Chancery isn't just processing legal cases, it's behaving like an ecological predator.
It baits its victims, the suitors, with the illusion of justice, and then it just feeds on them. It eats them alive to keep its own massive institutional body functioning.
And what exactly is this beast feeding on? Well, Chancery drains three primary resources. First, time. It literally drags cases across generations. Second, money. It demands exorbitant, endless legal fees just to keep the bureaucratic wheels turning. And third, life itself. The sheer stress of the system causes physical and mental disease, and very often, death. And remember, this wasn't just some clever literary device. Connor's paper points out that this accurately reflected the real, historic terrors the British public had regarding the agonizingly slow 19th century legal system.
Let's move to and see how this builds into an inescapable trap. Here is the agonizing, three-step procedure of Chancery. Step 1. Bait the suitors with a promise of resolving an estate. Step 2. Entangle them in decades of procedure. The analysis points to a character named Gridley, whose case lasted 25 years and involved 17 different parties. Absolutely insane, right? And finally, Step 3. Keep the suit open until the entire estate is absorbed in legal costs. The process itself is the punishment. The most famous example in the book is the Jarndyce and Jarndyce case, which drones on for so long that literally no one even understands what it's about anymore.
Now, to carry out this predation, the system needs teeth, and that's where lawyers like Mr. Vholes come in. They act as literal parasites. Think about it in a biological sense. A parasite slowly consumes its host without immediately killing it. Vholes forms this intimate, inescapable relationship with his desperate client, and he just slowly sucks out his finances and his life force, all to keep the system, and himself, fed.
Which brings us to the inescapable tragedy of Richard Carstone. Richard's micro-narrative is pretty much the perfect, heartbreaking example of this predation in action. He starts out with so much potential, but he becomes entirely obsessed with resolving the Jarndyce and Jarndyce case. This obsession, which is totally egged on by his parasitic lawyer Vholes, drains his money, ruins his health, and ultimately kills him. And the darkest irony of all, he dies right as a final will is found, only to learn the massive estate has been entirely consumed by legal fees. There is literally nothing left.
You see, Dickens wasn't just writing a story here. He was launching a massive cultural critique. As we wrap up this anatomy of a masterpiece, he leaves us with this incredibly searing warning: suffer any wrong that can be done you rather than come here. It's this desperate, emotional plea to his readers to stay far, far away from the legal system, because in the end, the predator always wins.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. If the Court of Chancery was the great, terrifying institutional predator of 1852 London, what modern institutions might act as the predators of today? Are there bureaucratic systems we interact with right now that bait us, entangle us, and slowly drain our time, money, and life? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that question until next time.